Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to talk about death and the judgment that actually comes afterwards. And in this presentation, I'm going to talk about the common destiny of mankind, what all people share in common in this particular world, regardless of the kind of life that the individual may have. Then I also talk about the judgment that actually exists after death. Then I'll talk about the final destination for the soul of every person. Then I'll summarize the presentation. Then I would end the presentation with a prayer. So let's get started. As people that we live in this world, we have a common destiny, regardless of whatever life or status the individual may be at. We all, as human beings, actually have a common destiny, basically. And this destiny that we share in common is death, basically, because it's something that happens to everybody. Eventually, you live your life, you get to the point where you eventually have to die. And every one of us, regardless of whether you're rich or poor, or whether you're white or black or whatever it is, will have to experience death. So death is actually something that we all share in common, and it's something that will eventually happen to every human being or everything that has life in it. And when we look at us as human beings, the cycle of life is basically the same when you look at life from a higher perspective or an advanced perspective, because basically what happens is that there's a point in time when you get born into this particular life. Then there's a period that you live your life from the time you're born, and then a time comes when your life must come to an end, where you die off and you have to leave this particular world. And everybody, regardless of the status or regardless of who the individual is, this is basically the life of mankind. And the fact that we live and we have to die at some point in time in our lives, should be the basis upon which every reasonable person should be interested in understanding the meaning of life. There's a lot of things, which appeared ordered in life, which appear to follow patterns, or certain hidden laws, basically. So things like these, should actually trigger the intellect of people. Should push people to try to seek out what life actually means, or what actually is in life that goes beyond what we see. Because definitely the life that we experience is not all about what we see. And this life that we are in, that we are going through, actually goes far beyond what we see and what we feel in this physical realm. Life is basically a continuum, it's a continuation, and this continuation actually joins two realms, the physical and the spiritual realms. Because we get created in the spiritual realm, we get born into this physical realm, and then we die off and return into the spiritual realm, never to return or never to come back again into this particular life. So it's one big continuation from the spiritual realm into the physical realm, then back into the spiritual realm, basically. We all die at some point in our lives, and immediately after the death, judgment actually follows, basically. And this judgment actually is administered based on how you live your life in this particular world. And everybody actually will go through this particular process. Every human being, no one will have the power to escape this particular process. And this judgment is basically administered by God to the soul of the individual based on what you actually did with your life when you were living in this particular life. And the process of judgment, or the outcome of the judgment that you go through, will determine your final destination, or the final destination of your soul. And there are two main destinations in this particular regard. And these final destinations are either you get to be with God, in a dwelling place of God, or in the eternal dwelling place of God, or you get to be separated away from God, in hell, together with the devil and his angels. So these are the two main destinations, and where you end in these two options is based on what you actually did with your life in this particular world. And being with God, in the dwelling place of God, which is in heaven, actually grants you eternal rest. It gives you peace, and it also gives you satisfaction for your soul for the rest of eternity. So it's a place of rest, basically, for the soul. However, being separated away from God delivers you up to eternal torment and suffering, because once you are separated away from God, your destination is straight into hell. And hell, there's nothing good over there. It's just torment, suffering, chaos, and complete pandemonium over there. And this is something that those who end up over there would have to endure for eternity. There is no escape for them. Now, after physical death on this earth, the soul continues to exist for eternity. The soul is an eternal creation. So the soul actually exists with us in this particular life, and then once we die off, this physical body dies off, basically, but the soul continues to exist and moves on into eternity. And it is this soul that would have to go through the judgment process and end up in one of the two permanent destinations. And there are two destinations for the soul, basically. And these destinations, as I've said before, is either to be with God in heaven, as described in Matthew 25, or being separated away from God, and the separation is what we refer to as hell. And these two places, whether you get to be with God in heaven or in hell, these are real places that exist in the spiritual realm, and these are one of either of the two or the two final destinations where every soul is going to end up in one of these destinations, basically. So those who get to be with God in heaven, will have eternal rest, and those who get to be separated away from God, would have hopelessness, torment and suffering, basically, for the rest of eternity. And there's no going back, in any one of these destinations. What determines your final destination is the kind of relationship you had with God in this particular life. When you lived your life on earth, what kind of relationship did you have with God? Did you even care about God at all? Did you make any effort to get to know God? Were you able to make the necessary sacrifices to actually live, by the commandments that God gave, to live in peace with your people, to love each other? Were you able to do this? If you were able to do this, then that would also affect the kind of relationship that you have with God, and that will also determine whether you can actually have a dwelling place in the eternal presence of God. However, if you did not have any relationship with God, or you had nothing to do with God, issues of God had no importance to you, you were just focused on pursuing your short life in this particular world, then your final destination is going to be in a separation. It's going to be away from God, basically. So that is what it is. And after judgment, no one can expect to be with God, or can expect to be or dwell in the eternal dwelling presence of God when they never knew Him in this particular life. That concept even applies to even us here in this world. Those who had no relationship with God when they lived their lives in this particular world have no business having anything to do, with the eternal dwelling place of God, basically. So all these people will end up in the separation. And in this particular separation, they are going to be available for torment, by the devil and his demons and all those kinds of things in hell. Basically, that's what hell basically is. It's a separation away from all the good attributes, or the life that God actually gives out to sustain, life in this particular world. Basically, hell is the absence of all these things. So once you end up over there, your life will be completely miserable for the rest of eternity. So in summary, as people, as mankind, we all share death as a common destiny, because it is something that happens to everybody, every one of us, regardless of whether you're rich or poor, or whether you're black or white. Death will actually happen when the time comes. And after death, for every individual, there's always judgment by God based on how you lived your life on this particular earth. And this judgment is something, that has been established for every particular person. And no one has the power to actually escape this particular judgment, basically. And the outcome of this judgment is going to be the final determinant of where you get to dwell for eternity, or where your soul gets to dwell for eternity. And there are two main places. Either you get to be in heaven with God, or you get to be in hell, separated completely away from God. And any of these destinations is a permanent destination for your soul, because once you get into these destinations, there's no going back. And heaven is a real place in the spiritual realm. Hell also is a real place in the spiritual realm, and it is important that no one actually deceives themselves, because these places are real, and these are the final destinations for the soul of people. Evil people who have nothing to do with God, who live their lives any way they wanted, and who actually succumb to the desires of the flesh, will have nothing to do, with being in heaven. Their destination is straight into hell, basically. And heaven is reserved for those who actually had a good relationship with God, those who were able to live, according to the dictates and commandments of God in this particular life. That is the place reserved for them, basically. So it's either one of these two places. And once you end up in either one of these two places, it is your final or permanent destination. There is no going back, basically. And those who do not make it to heaven will definitely end up in the separation, in hell. And in hell, because there's nothing good in hell, it's pure suffering, torture, hopelessness. These people who reject God in this particular life, who end up in hell, the hopelessness alone, you would wish you were never born in this life in the first place, because the regret of knowing that you had a chance in this particular life to give your life to God and actually escape this horrible place, and you never took this chance, and then you ended up in this particular horrible place. The regret and the hopelessness alone, would torment you forever, basically. So this is what it is. So at this particular point, I'd like to let you know that there's a God who created this world, and this God is the same God who made you and I, basically. It is very important that we don't live our lives, and close our eyes completely to this particular God, or live our lives and go to chase some other different creature, basically. We need to be able to relate to this particular God, because this God is the only God who can save from hell. No other entity can actually save from hell. Pray this prayer with me. Dear God, I come before you today. I thank you for your gift of salvation. Please save me from perishing in hell. Help me know you and establish me in your presence forever. I thank you for listening to my prayer. And brothers and sisters, if you prayed this prayer sincerely from your heart, I believe that the one true God who created this world and made everything possible will manifest to you things that will blow your mind, things that you could never imagine. Stay blessed. And these are some references that actually I used during the presentation. You can check them out at your own leisure. At this point, I'd like to thank you for making the time to watch my presentation. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.